Hi, I'm DEFNE, and this is my poem Somebody Teaches You, which got second place at the Sydney Writers' Festival Bankstown Poetry Slam, and I got as a prize a little crochet watermelon from B, which is really cool. I love crochet stuff. I would like to give a content warning for this poem. It does deal with a lot of difficult themes. I don't think the poem talks about it graphically, but maybe in the actual explanation we might talk more. So, if you need to take a break, please take care of yourself. It talks about suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, abuse, mental health, and sexual assault. This poem started off as an angry rant at 2 a.m. basically 5 years ago. It was literally just me typing on my phone like, nobody teaches you this and nobody teaches you that. When I started this poem, I had all these ideas. I was kind of like, alright, there's too much here. We need to try and figure out a focus for it. And I was like, we're gonna focus on mental health and abuse, because I feel like those are like the biggest things that have impacted me, and specifically because they have been nameless. And you know, it's been in reworking this poem for the Bankstown Grand Slam with my group that I've kind of realized as well that like the focus is on nameless things, not just anything that nobody teaches you. I genuinely think how much better I would have been off and how much better other people would be off if we had some more education, whether that's within the actual educational system or whether that's like from family, from friends, just something. Nobody teaches you about self-harm. It's not just the scars you notice on a friend's arms. It can look like you not eating. Fitting. Self-harm is self-taught. Till that friend tells you your relationship with someone else is self-destructive. Yeah, so we're starting off quite heavy. I can't necessarily... I don't feel like anybody taught me about self-harm, and usually we associate Usually I think the biggest thing we associate with self-harm is cutting, and I feel like that's something that I saw images online and whatnot. And then, in terms of eating disorders, I was a big reader when I was younger. And so I'd read about, like, girls having bulimia or anorexia, but it was always tied to, like, body image. I didn't realize that you could still have an eating disorder that could have nothing to do with body image. And for me in high school, it was that my dad was abusive and then always in the living room, and you had to get from my room to the kitchen through the living room, and I just didn't want to have any interaction. And then it's like, even when I had access to food, I just no longer wanted to eat anymore. And it's still something that, I struggle with now in terms of depression, not even having the energy to eat and whatnot. And it's just one of those things I wish somebody taught me. Yeah, and then that friend, I was in like this weird, queer, toxic friendship/relationship thing in high school. And, there comes a point where even if it's because somebody is hurting you, if you keep going back after a certain amount of time, it kind of becomes a means of self-destruction to yourself as well. And sometimes you need somebody to tell you that. I remember after school, at your pool, underwater, I saw your thighs. Why was I surprised it would be distributed elsewhere? We helped bring each other to the surface, but so much is not bubbling at the top. So yeah, that actually happened. Was at my friend's pool. And yeah, I remember being underwater, seeing that and having a moment like, oh. And I kind of just wanted to continue a bit of the pool imagery, because I was thinking about how, like, we helped each other not drown in a way, and kind of helped each other realize things, and, kind of using the phrase of so much is not bubbling at the top for, like, things that aren't obvious. And then I think it's a good way to transition into more things that are not bubbling at the top. I think of poems as, like, a layering of meaning, and then the performance is another layer. So it's like, what can I do for each line that's going to give another layer to the meaning and contribute more to the meaning and the understanding as well. And sometimes that's not just the gestures going with what I'm talking about, but it's like I can be very specific about the way I say things, like this emotion, go deeper in your voice here, yada yada, because I'll try things and be like, this didn't work so well, this was quite effective, and even if I might perform a poem a bunch of times, it's like I want to make sure that I still give it the best kind of performance I can, because somebody else is going to be seeing it for the first time. Nobody teaches you about abuse. So your father teaches your sister a thing or two, but then nobody tells her it can be verbal and emotional, because the first therapist is also Middle Eastern and tells her that's just the way it is, till a white therapist tells her what it is. I was kind of thinking of the line of like, I'm gonna teach you a lesson that like parents can use in terms of like discipline, but that that can also actually be abuse as well. And it's like I wanted to talk about it without it necessarily being graphic, so I think just like the line of like teaches your sister a thing or two kind of worked. You know, I think in certain cultures a lot of behavior that is actually abusive is normalized. When I performed this poem, a friend of mine was recording, and then when I got to that specific line, also kind of similar ethnic culture to me, I'm Turkish by the way, they was like, they did like a oof, that was kind of validating. But yeah, like I come from like a Turkish culture and also a Muslim background, and it's like even though my family aren't that religious, they're quite cultural, and the culture comes a lot from religion, and you know, there's of course beautiful things about the religion and culture and whatnot, but there are other things in terms of like being really controlling. Being told something is just the way it is not helpful. And I think sometimes you do need a white perspective because even though there are certain things that also white people won't necessarily understand, like one of the things I've experienced with is like white people just being like, just leave, like it's not that easy and whatnot, but yeah. My therapist says I'm not the first perfectionist she's met, but I am. This paralysis it insists it exists. I did not understand, but wish someone else did. I never had any representation of perfectionists around me, and I felt like, you know, for me it started in high school and I was the only one kind of going through that, and I was like, what is going on with me? The poetic aspect of it, I wanted to use like sibilants and assonance so that like the repetition of sound also kind of communicated like the repetition of this problem. Yeah. I showed a friend of mine like a recording of this performance, and at the specific line, my therapist says I'm not the first perfectionist she's met, but I am. She laughed, and that made me really like glad, because I also think there's something funny about that. Yeah.
Do you know why she laughed?
Maybe because it was relatable, but also because I think it's a bit of a funny concept in terms of like meeting yourself, like you are the first person of something and you meet yourself, because you don't necessarily think about meeting yourself, you think about meeting other people. I did not know I was diagnosed with anxiety. My mother hid the letter. Us what did it matter? I am still me, and I know she had the best intentions at heart, but she does not know how my heart goes. Labels can set you free. At least then you know it's not just me. Yeah, I was referred to like a psychologist outside of high school, and then I went back to like my school counselor, and they were like, so you've been diagnosed with anxiety? I'm like, what? This is news to me. And they're like, you should have gotten a letter in the mail. So I asked my mum about it, and she was like, oh yeah. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? And she was like, it doesn't change anything, you're still you. But it does change something. I remember I used to go to the library after school to like do homework and whatnot, and there was a time where I was literally crying, rolling on the floor, and the two kind of like teacher supervisors, they were like, what the hell is going on? And I think they messaged my English teacher, and then my English teacher sent a message on Edmodo being like, I think your anxiety comes from perfectionism. And it was like a moment, because it was like, even though I had said things about like, I just want it to be perfect, I hadn't heard that word before, and, you know, I was really struggling with, like, I had a couple of lines before that I had to, like, cut out because of time, so it was just, like, something about, like, I began to slave away a sentence a day, a good rate, because it was literally that. And then, performance-wise, again, I wanted to make it feel like the way it felt for me. In terms of labels set you free, it's like, yes, okay, now I'm in a box. Like, I'm in a box, but it's like, oh, there are other people in this box as well. Somebody teaches you chemistry, but not that your brain chemistry can fuck up. There's a difference between feeling and being depressed. I didn't say the latter in concern it would be a disservice to others till I realized that was a disservice to myself. Yeah, I wanted to play a bit with the anaphora of nobody teaches you, so it's just like a repetitive line throughout, and make a contrast between like what you are actually taught in high school and what you're not, and what would kind of be helpful. And I feel like, in high school they mentioned anxiety and depression, but not the fact that, like, it's not all circumstantial. Like, you could have the basics of your life all good and be fine, and your brain still is like, and I think because I like to think I'm a very empathetic person, and, you know, I guess there were people around me that were depressed, so just, like, imaginary, like, in my mind, it's like, I don't want to say I'm depressed when I don't have it that bad, and yada, 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 but then, because I thought that, I took longer to realize, oh, I am depressed, I need help, and whatnot. Nobody teaches you about personality disorders, till you're pretty sure your father's got bipolar, till your best friend crosses one too many lines, so you wonder if they've got borderline, diagnosed years later only after a suicide attempt. You do not need a bruise to prove. I feel like even if you are taught about mental health in high school, it's just anxiety and depression is just mentioned, and I'm really passionate about this because, oh my god, there's so much more. It was through kind of my friend's experience that I think we both kind of realized how messed up the system kind of is, like, in terms of, I think once they went to a psych ward and it was literally like, you're not bad enough for us to admit you yet. And it's like, so yeah, even though there are those warning signs, they can be dismissed. Even in terms of not just the people around you, but in terms of medical support, there is a gap. And I remember my friend being like, what do I have to do? So what, I have to get worse to get better? Which is not going to make recovery any easier. With the line, you do not need a bruise to prove, I also just liked how similar those two words sounded, because in a way it's like, oh, we're going to equate the two because of the sound as well, but you shouldn't. A bruise does not equal proof. If you're struggling, please know people care and that there is help out there. And you can hit me up. Yep. And laughter, obviously a coping mechanism for me. But I don't even necessarily think it's just a defense mechanism. It's also a mechanism for understanding. Like, I truly understand that, like, it's ridiculous and absurd and wild that these are things that happen or whatnot. Yeah. Somebody, maybe, teaches you consent. Yet people still ask, was I raped? That should not be a question. And if you were to ask me what being a feminist meant, part of it's admitting that females can do the same. that the patriarchal system doesn't always benefit all men. We tell them it's not masculine to express emotion, then wonder why it all funnels into anger. One of the things I like about the previous line, you do not need a bruise to prove, is that I feel like it acts as a line in between both suicide but also sexual assault, because it's similar. Like, you do not need kind of physical evidence for the fact that this has happened and this is happening. And I wanted to again kind of play with that anaphora by saying somebody, but adding maybe, because it's also like, it's very lucky if you do actually get taught it, and even if you get taught it, it's an entire different thing actually trying to, actually experiencing consent and your consent not being respected and trying to express boundaries, And so this line about people asking, was I raped, was, like, some years ago, I would be on the subreddit of sex, and I would and sometimes it's just like, oh, fun things, like, oh, people tried this, felt good, great. But other times it would be people being like, this happened, was I raped? Sometimes they wouldn't necessarily even ask that question, but they would say about this experience, be like, I feel a bit like this, and people having to comment like, that is rape, this person doesn't respect you, get out, yada yada. And it was just really sad how many of those there are, and there still are. And so it's like, that should not be a question, kind of has two meanings for me, and one is like, that shouldn't be a question because it shouldn't happen in the first place. But second, if it does happen, I wish it wasn't a question. Yeah, I was very passionate about adding that if you were to ask me what being a feminist meant, part of it's admitting that females can do the same. Females can also rape. And there's still not a lot of conversation about men getting raped. And men can get raped. I think there's a more conversation of men getting raped by other men, but even less so of females. And I think my first kind of introduction to even this idea was when I was like, maybe in year 11. There's this poem, Kevin Cantor, People You May Know, performance poem, which was about their rapists coming up on Facebook's People You May Know. And it was the first kind of introduction to like, oh, this is a thing that happened. And, I remember studying for my English Extension 2 project. I learned about how in the US military, men who would get sexually assaulted would be falsely discharged under, they have a personality disorder. So it's not only do they not get help, they get discharged, and it's a dishonorable discharge, and it's like, yeah. And then I also wanted to include this because I really dislike this idea of women are perfect, they're goddesses, they can do no wrong, because I don't think that's actually helpful to anyone. The first way feminism was described or explained to me is just the belief that females and males are equal. And that is still kind of my definition. So it's like, everyone has the capacity to do good and to do bad. And so that kind of, to me, linked into just the overall patriarchal system, and that it benefits a lot of men, but it doesn't always, and it's also where toxic masculinity comes from, and it's also why, stuff like this happens and men feel like they can't talk about it, the fact that we don't have accurate statistics because it goes so much less reported, because it's the idea of like, men are strong. How can men who are usually physically stronger than females possibly be assaulted? But it's like, there are so many ways still, like, and sometimes a female might be physically stronger than a male. Sometimes it's like they're under the influence. Sometimes your body freezes. I was thinking about how it feels like the only socially acceptable emotion for men to express is anger. Yeah, because there's this idea that anger is not a primary emotion. There's always something below it, and it's like hurt or whatnot. But we're not teaching our men how to properly and safely express that. And then that continues the cycle. We tell them it's not masculine to express emotion, they just express it in anger, and then that anger can lead into hurting other people. Nobody teaches you. You could tell me that it's the point of life. Figure it out. But I think about all the pain that could have been avoided. You know, we're kind of taught that, like, life is about just figuring things out, but it's still, like, we could have been in a better position to learn this, to have some idea before we had to experience it for ourselves. And it would have protected us more. We would have been able to deal with things more. And, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, both with suicide and sexual assault, but also, you know, abuse. Like, you do not need a bruise to prove. And I'm really passionate about also talking more about how abuse is emotional and verbal. Because the difficult thing about that is feeling like it's not what it is, and feeling like thus you cannot talk about it. And I remember sometimes wanting things to get worse just so I felt like it's okay if I talk to somebody about this. Nobody teaches you shit. Good thing my name isn't nobody. We are the victims of things with no names till we become the survivors that name them. Good thing my name isn't nobody is a slight allusion to the Greek myth of, I hope I pronounce this correctly, Odysseus telling a Cyclops, my name is nobody, and then when he stabs him in the eye, and a Cyclops, like, cries out, the other Cyclops are like, what's going on? And it's like, nobody hurt me. So they don't think anything is wrong, and they don't go after him and whatnot. I was thinking in terms of, like, a name being nobody, but it's also like, I'm not nobody. I'm going to let you know what's hurting you. And then the last two lines are some of my favorite lines I've ever written. I'm just proud of them. Even though it's not, like, it's quite simple. There's, you know, I feel like a nice parallelism to it, but it's simple, and I feel like it really sums up the whole poem for me, but also it sums up my experience. You know, there's this dialogue of, like, don't call people victims, call them survivors, and some people like that, some people don't. And I think for me, I was just a victim until I kind of had the words to describe what I was a victim of. And that's when it becomes empowering, when you can name it. And I think this is just what we as poets, as artists, as just people do. We're trying to name things. And, you know, after I performed this poem at Bankstown, I had someone come up to me and thank me for the poem. And I think out of all the compliments that you can get when somebody thanks you, I think that is one that means the most, because I feel like there was this kind of, like, unspoken understanding, like, they've probably experienced something that this poem mentions, and they're grateful that somebody else is talking about it. It's a lot. It's a heavy poem, and, you know, even though, you know, within the poem it's about nobody teaches you, I've titled it Somebody Teaches You, because for me it's being able to kind of become that person. So it links to my line of good thing my name isn't nobody. My name is somebody. If nobody else is gonna teach you, I'm gonna try my best to try and teach other people a bit. Yep.
DEFNE teaches you.
DEFNE teaches you. Good thing my name isn't nobody. We are the victims of things with no names till we become the survivors that name them. Thank you. If you want to do a little bonus, I like choosing my earrings for specific reasons. I chose these color pencil shavings because I was like, that is school aligned.